Welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Stories of Determination. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani Fassbinder. Like in nature, we see determined flowers and vines clinging to life and seeking light. So are Morning Glory people. And in this podcast, I'll interview writers, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, survivors and thrivers, and trailblazers of all kinds. These are folks that have been determined to get over, under, around, and through the obstacles that face them, or to seize the opportunities that come before them. I find these people inspiring and amazing. I know you will too. Today on the Morning Glory Project, I'm so happy to welcome somebody whom I've met in the pages, but not in person. Mark S. King is an award-winning writer and activist who's been living with HIV since testing positive in 1985. Only weeks after the HIV test became publicly available. His blog, My Fabulous Disease, shares his personal story and remarks on people and issues important to those living with HIV. His book, A Place Like This, chronicles his life in Los Angeles during the dawn of the epidemic. I'm a gay HIV-positive addict in recovery, Mark is fond of saying. What's not to love? Mark's website and blog, My Fabulous Disease, is the home base for his writing and video work. It's been nominated for 4 consecutive GLAAD Media Awards. Mark is a double, triple, maybe quadruple Morning Glory person who's persevered past diagnosis of HIV, which was then considered a terminal one, past addiction, and into redemption. He's a constant advocate and activist in the HIV world and in the LGBTQ world as well. Mark King, welcome so much to the Morning Glory Project. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Betsy, and I appreciate the invitation. I like what you're doing here.
You know, there's so much going on in the world that's so discouraging that the decency and goodness and hope and survival and creativity and all of that is getting lost. So that's where the Morning Glory Project is born. I don't want to ignore the bad stuff going on, but I don't want to ignore the good stuff going on either.
Thank goodness.
And you, Mark, certainly embody the idea of the Morning Glory, the idea of the persistent over, through, and around obstacles. And I first became acquainted with you, and I'll dip into your territory here with Double Entendre. I first got to know you between the sheets, only it was between the sheets of paper in the fabulous book Shades of Blue, edited by Amy Ferris, where we both have stories in there. And it's Shades of Blue, Writers on Depression, Suicide, and Feeling Blue. And your story in it, Suicide, A Love Story, was one that just absolutely not only jumped off the page to me, but lived with me for the last couple of years, even before I picked it up again, preparing for this interview. I reread it recently, and I was so deeply touched by it and your story in general. So tell me, you are known as an HIV or AIDS activist and a champion of the LGBTQ community. Tell me a little bit about what you do now, and then we'll talk about how you got there.
Oh, sure. Well, now I have the privilege of being primarily a writer. I write on my own site, of course, My Fabulous Disease, but I'm also connected with a lot of LGBTQ and HIV media platforms. So I do a lot of feature work with them on HIV stigma and LGBT issues, and do some editing as well. So I'm really kind of a full-time, I do a lot of travel and speaking about being a long-term survivor and reporting back from conferences and highlighting people that inspire me. That's my favorite part. I'm kind of beholden to nobody. I seek out stories that interest me and inspire me, and tell those stories of those people in this journey who are doing some great work. And so that's what I get to do today. It's a real privilege.
Well, you and I share that, I guess, in a different arena, but that's exactly what I feel like I have the honor of doing, is seeking out the people that I want to talk to and hear from. And you're one of them. So you were diagnosed with HIV when it was just in its infancy. I moved to San Francisco in 1982 when they were still calling it the gay cancer, those kinds of things, when there wasn't, and there was ARC and there was all kinds of other words attached to that. And I imagined that outside of your community and outside of your educational efforts, it seems as though HIV has sort of receded into the background of people's awareness, and they kind of think, oh, well, we did that. We've got it fixed now. It's no big deal anymore. But that's not how you pursue this. You're continuing in your education efforts. Can you tell me a little more about what the state of things are right now?
Well, the state of things medically, scientifically are terrific in terms of people living with HIV who have access to treatment and care, are able to essentially wipe the virus out, all active virus from their bodies. Not that they're not HIV positive anymore. They just, their virus can be completely controlled. And when it is controlled and they become what they call undetectable, then they're not able to transmit the virus to anyone else. So I am not capable of transmitting HIV to anyone else. And that's science that we've only learned in the last few years. And what a profound change.
And how exciting that is. How thrilling that is.
I didn't realize how much I felt like a vector of disease. Even with all of my advocacy, even with all of my positive messages I've been pushing out to other people living with HIV all this time, to finally feel something lifted from me that I didn't ever realize was a burden I was carrying. And that was, I am no longer a threat to someone else. It's a profound shift in HIV. So, medically, we have that. It's also true that we have a good 10,000 people in the United States who die of AIDS-related complications every year. Some people claim that number is higher. And why is that? Why do we live now in this day and age where that is happening? Well, there's people who don't have access to health care and treatment and testing, and that's true. But then there's a lot of people like me who are long-term survivors who are tired, who have been dealing with this for a long time, who have had a lifetime of toxic medications, who have fatigue about just keeping it up and facing social stigma, which I believe has risen. Even as medical science has improved, social stigma against those of us living with HIV has risen. It's easier to mark us, to reject us, to see us as untrustworthy, unwanted, and I'm afraid that continues.
Well, we are speaking as we record this on October 10th, 2019. We are even now awaiting the Supreme Court's rulings about LGBTQ law protecting employment. So it is certainly active, certainly, and I can see how exhausting it must be, particularly for you having had this for such a long time. As I said, I moved to San Francisco in 1982, and then, frankly, I attended a lot of funerals in that 10 years, my first 10 years there. And I'm pleased to know that there's treatment and that some of those that I lost then might be saved today. And that's wonderful. But let's go back a little bit. I think of you as kind of a threefer, if you will, in terms of coming out. First of all, you had to come out as a gay person. Then you came out as an HIV person. And then you came out as an addicted person.
Yes.
So I don't know if you've busted all the closet doors, but it seems that you have.
I'm doing my best. I mean, as you said, what's not to love? I'm a gay HIV positive addict in recovery. And that's something my mother used to say. I said, Mother, I'm writing another article. This time it's about the fact that, I'm recovering from addiction. And she says, oh, you're gay, you're positive, you're an addict. What's not to love? And really, I got that expression from her. Only a mother's love, right? So, these are all, I really believe that, for me, the secret of life, as it were, has become taking that which we find the most challenging, that which might bring us the most shame or challenge, is the very thing, if we're able to speak about it, if we're able to do that even in the smallest way, that can help someone else. And I do that. I know I do it from a place of privilege. I know that I'm able to speak about these things because I don't have immediate threats to my job or relationship or family or physical violence. So I claim that privilege, and I know it. But I must be able to talk openly about all that I am, and because I know that somebody is listening that might need to hear it.
That's an important little nugget I don't want to miss out on, which is that which is the most difficult becomes the thing you must speak about. I'm touched by that. Now, I'm also, there's a kink in your story that made me
darling, there are many kinks in my story.
Of all kinds. But
yes.
the one specifically that I'm talking about is, I think that most people that are recovering addicts as well as HIV folks, there's an assumption that they were drug addicts and then they got their disease. They got HIV because of their drug-related behavior. Yours is not that story.
No.
So tell our listeners a little bit about the sequence of your events.
Sure. Well, first of all, the first characteristic you must know is I grew up as a gay boy in the South, surrounded in a place that I didn't feel safe, where I had a secret, where I didn't feel as if people really knew the real me, they would accept me. So that was baseline, was that feeling of secrecy and shame. When HIV came along, even though I had by then come to terms with being a gay man and being all prideful and stuff, I was 24 years old in 1985 when I tested positive, and suddenly it triggered all of those same feelings of secrecy and shame. Oh, if people found out about this, they wouldn't love me. And I, just in the way I was almost militantly gay, even as a teenager back in Louisiana, I became very aggressively open about my HIV status because it was kind of a defense mechanism. I will tell you this, I will share this before you can penalize me for it, before you can shame me about it. I'm going to tell you first. And it was a defense mechanism.
You think it's kind of like a comedian who self-deprecates the thing that
yes.
if they're overweight or if they're whatever they might be, they're kind of self-deprecating. It's like, I'm going to insult me before you do, and I'm going to take power over it.
Yes. And yet, just as we know about so many comics, it comes from a place of pain. It comes from a place of pain. And certainly that did for me. In other words, for all of my confidence about speaking up and out as a gay man living with HIV, which I did for so many years, there was a lot of doubt and insecurity in there. And I was just putting on a brave face and doing the best that I could. Just like I survived the 80s and the death of so many people around me by kind of putting on a brave face and charging forward, because really, what choice did we have? And so you ask about the drug addiction, although I did my share of recreational this and that, in my youth and living in Los Angeles and whatnot, nothing was really ever intrusive in my life. Nothing got out of hand. It was, an occasional thing. I was in my 20s. It was LA. There was Coke, occasionally. But something happened around the mid-90s when the new drugs came out that treated us for HIV. There was a real milestone. Suddenly people with AIDS, people living with HIV, got up off of their deathbeds and literally began life anew, because we had new drugs at long last that would keep us alive. And that was a real milestone around 1996. Well, there was something that happened in me. It was almost as if I reverted back to the 24-year-old that I was when I was first diagnosed. And I thought, I want that life back. I've missed so much. I've been cloistered. I've been shameful and all of that. And now I'm going to live. And so it was almost like another adolescence. And I acted out, and I went to the dance clubs and got the personal trainer and took steroids and became like this muscular gay victim of my culture, telling me that these were the things that mattered. And and took to the dance floor. And then pretty soon there were drugs, but serious drugs. And crystal meth was creeping into the gay community. And before long, despite having had a history of dabbling in things here and there and understanding how to not get too involved in that, within a fairly short period of time, within a few years, certainly by the early 2000s, I was doing crystal meth daily and injecting it. And it's almost, it still kind of puzzles me. I've obviously worked through this in my whole recovery process, and I know that the responsibility is all mine and must be mine. But it's interesting to me that I responded that way to the good news that I was going to live the rest of my life. It's almost as if there was a little survivor guilt at long last, that I chose to live so recklessly when given this gift of, guess what? You have new drugs. You're not going to die. It's almost like there was a second epidemic for me, a second health crisis of my own making the second time around.
I wonder if, in addition to that sort of second adolescence and rebellion part, if you also felt a little bulletproof, hey, I got through that one. I'm immune to everything.
There you go. That would be, that's,
I don't know if that's
reasonable.
True for you, but I wonder from the outside in.
Oh yeah. I think that's a reasonable thing. I think there were several things at work, and, I think primarily it was a lot of unresolved stuff about, do I get my life back? Do I get to reclaim these things that I thought I had missed out on? But unfortunately, those things that I thought I'd missed out on were very surface things, were, physical beauty and muscles and dance floor and sex and, all of these things that I thought I had somehow missed out on. I mean, again, I was operating within a gay community in Los Angeles, which is virulently shallow and focuses on those things. And I bought into it lock, stock, and barrel.
But what were you really missing out on? What do you think were the substantive things that you'd missed out on during that period?
Growth, personal maturity, a feeling of having a life ahead of me that was meaningful and of worth. And I say that even though, gosh, there was so much meaning in what I experienced. Even in the darkest years, with all of the mortality and living with HIV, feeling like I was going to be next, and at any moment, I would get the cough or the spot or something would happen, and the countdown would begin. Right? Even in that time, the beautiful humanity of us as a community, the way that we all stood up when people were rejecting us and governments were rejecting us. And when we stood up for ourselves and said, we will take care of one another. And I participated in that. I got to participate in that. So I guess in some ways, I don't want to sell myself short to say that I was, I participated in that, and it was tragic and traumatic and inspiring and beautiful. And the beauty, the beauty of being with a friend who is dying and being there in his last moments, surrounded by the other friends of his, some of us also living with HIV, and being there for the intimacy of death is its own kind of miracle, especially when you're doing it within this loving embrace of your friends. And so that's tragic, and it's also beautiful. It's also a miracle of its own. And I got to participate in that many times.
So that was still present. You had experienced that, but you sort of had this adolescent rebellion. I remember hearing you say in one of the videos that I watched of you that you were, by the way, when you began using meth, you were an executive director of a nonprofit organization, HIV education support, correct?
Yes,
So,
I
so you
was.
you were up there. You were doing the real work with real people, and like you said, having these real miraculous experiences and moments, and touching loss and tragedy and wonder and all of that. And then you described yourself as sort of having whiplash. That here, when you got your kind of clear health, that that's when you added in the meth. That's when that went in. So while most people perhaps started with the meth addiction and then developed the HIV, you went the other way and developed addiction at that point.
And it was emotional whiplash. I mean, if you think about it, I had my whole life ahead of me at 24 years old. I was on the top of the world. I thought everything was going to be great. Then I found out I had HIV and everybody around me started dying. So you're going to live, and then no, you're going to die. And then around 96, they said, oh, you're going to live after all. And you know, should I be grateful for that? Of course. And I was. But I was also confused emotionally, having prepared to die for so long. And and I think that it traumatized me. I think that what happened is after those 15 years of working in my community, helping to bury the dead and all of that, when the new drugs came out in the mid 90s, and I had been working nonstop personally and professionally, when those new drugs came out, we all took a breath. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, we can, and then the trauma really hit me of what I had been through. The trauma really hit me, and I was looking for an escape valve.
You know that moment when you're watching some romantic movie and the couple has struggled the whole movie and they've not been together and they've parted, and you think, oh, they're going to not make it. And then, of course, in the last minute, it's raining and they reunite at the train station and they're in the mad embrace. And that's when you cry. Like when everything is okay, that's when you cry.
Yeah.
It sounds like that kind of happened to you. Like, oh, the relief of this, like I was all prepared to die and now I'm going to live. That relief moment, that's when you felt all of it. That's when you felt all the losses and all of it. And ta-da, meth enters in and lets you escape from that once again.
Yes, and I took full advantage of that, and checked out for a few years as an active drug addict. I did. There's like a blank in my life of a few years where I don't really have anything to show for it, other than having just checked out. But we do recover.
And I'd like to note too something that I heard you say in my preparation for this, that you were holding this position as the executive director and then starting to look bad because of your meth use, but you were able to sort of fraudulently put that off on your HIV. Like people attributed that to HIV wasting, to AIDS wasting, and those kinds of things, that you were able to hide your addiction with your, at that point, non-existent HIV disease.
Isn't that morally bankrupt? Isn't that just as perverse as you can imagine? And
well, it just sounds like addiction to me. It just sounds like
addiction. Exactly.
Cling to, I've worked with addicts in various ways, and addicts that are realtors who attribute their lack of sales to the market as opposed to their drug use. And
right.
There's 1,000 ways that addicts hide. It was just one more disguise. You had a different kind of a cape to wear, a cape of invisibility to wear, and hide behind your HIV. At that point, it strikes me as so ironic.
Yes, and a shame, and it's so freeing now that I can live a life of integrity and honesty. I often say, and actually I just celebrated a large milestone yesterday in terms of my recovery, years and years since my last drink or a drug. And the thing that is most valuable to me, that I take the most pride in, is honesty. The fact that I can tell the truth, and I can tell it without fear of somebody finding out that I'm lying, or that I've, got this whole house of cards going and any minute it will topple over because it's filled with lies. No, that's not me. That's not me today.
That's a huge freedom.
It certainly is.
So what do you think were the inspiration? A lot of people talk about their bottom when they talk about addiction recovery, but what do you think were the inspirations or the decisions that you made or the resources that you found that helped you get from that meth addicted place to where you are now?
Well, I was inspired by people that reached out to me that were who were recovering addicts, who recognized I had a problem and offered to help me. I lived in a city in which there was an actual crystal meth program of recovery. And so I was fortunate in that way. And I saw a chance for me to regain some things that were clearly lost. I was adrift for a few years, and I saw a chance to get back and you know what? Hopefully we all do that. We return to whatever it is after having had that,
diversion.
Yes. For me, I have to have meaning. I have to know that what I'm doing is meaningful again. And for me, that meant returning to my life as a writer, chronicling not just actually the whole addiction process for me, but what it all means, why we're all here. How do I put into, and that's about the time that I wrote my book. How do I make sense of that which we went through in terms of AIDS and the addiction again? And I have come up with a couple of ideas, just a couple.
Oh, good. Share a couple of those with us.
Okay. One of them is this. I didn't go through all of that mortality and fear of death and dying and everything that happened with AIDS and all of that, if not to use it as an opportunity to have empathy for someone else. In other words, I spent a lot of years focused on my unique tragedy. Oh my gosh. And the fact is it was pretty tragic and it was pretty dramatic. I lived during a time when people around me, literally around me, my best friends, my neighbors, everybody was dying and of this terrible thing that nobody wanted to help us with. I didn't go through that if not to, it felt very dramatic. And I always say there's nothing like a drama queen with legitimate drama on their hands, right? Because then you can really just, become completely self-absorbed and you have legitimacy. You can do it because it's AIDS. It's terrible. Why not? However, what I've learned, especially through my recovery process, is that there's a lot of stuff out there. There are a lot of tragedies to go around. I don't have the market cornered on my great tragedy that was AIDS and or addiction, not by a long shot. And talking to any group of people, as I do, there's no telling what's going on in that room, who's experienced abuse or tragedy or death or who knows what. And I had to get out of myself. I had to learn how to take this thing that was very self-absorbed and very kind of this interior tragedy, as legitimate as it may have been, and learn how do I turn that out? How do I turn that out as a tool to hear more from you, Betsy, to hear more from this person or that person over there and listen to them and not be so focused on, you think that's bad. Let me tell you what happened to me. No.
It's not a competition.
It's not a competition. It is not. And in fact, I can shut up about my thing now, and unless I'm doing things like this, and just use it as lived experience, so that because I do a lot of listening now. I work with addicts in recovery, and I work with people who are newly diagnosed with HIV. They don't have to know my whole story, but my whole story informs me so that I'm a better listener, and I listen to them, and I'm a compassionate, empathetic presence to them. And that's what I think that has taught me at the end is we all got our stuff. And I know that it seems bad and a lot of it is legitimate, of course. How do we use that to be an empathetic ear or better friend to someone else?
That's lovely because it neither denies the reality of your own loss or suffering or trouble, nor does it make it more important than anyone else's. There's something quite poetically balanced and beautiful about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Mark, today you are living doing this work, you have also changed in your personal life, I'm gathering, as well in the last few years.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that before we close.
Absolutely. I'm happily married and have been for 5 years. I am stupid happy, and we both are, and that's a real gift. I spend a lot of time. I've just been invited to Rome to speak there for World AIDS Day on the end of November, and what a gift and responsibility that is, and so I continue doing what I'm doing and writing on my fabulous disease and leading with joy and leading with gratitude.
Well, I have some gratitude now for my encounters with you, both between the sheets of paper and
Yes.
And now in our conversation. I'll continue to follow what you do and hope that listeners will do that too. My fabulous disease is just a banquet of opportunity to find you celebrating not only your life and existence, but the lives and existences of so many amazing, colorful, delightful humans. And I'm so pleased to get to know you, Mark. And I hope that I know that others will find that too. Thank you so much for being part of the Morning Glory Project. I'm pleased to talk with you today.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I never thought I was a morning person, and now I guess I am.
Well, you're a morning glory person anyway. Clearly, Mark has used humor and intelligence and just sheer tenacity to bust the doors off of every possible closet, and as well as advocate for other people in the process. I'm touched by his joy and his freedom. And I thought about how I mentioned in the interview a 12-step recovery axiom that says you're only as sick as your secrets, and how Mark has busted out of all of those. I'm also still aware that the HIV epidemic is not over, though we tend to think that it is. It's receded into the background of the news. Elizabeth Taylor said it's bad enough that people are dying of AIDS, but no one should die of ignorance. So I invite you to check out Mark King's work, certainly his blog, My Fabulous Disease, but also his other writing as well, and to see how you can contribute to continuing education on the issue of HIV and addiction. Mark is certainly a morning glory, blooming and blooming and blooming beyond when he thought he might ever do so, and I'm thrilled to have had him on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Morning Glory Project, Stories of Determination. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a like or two or a positive review where you find your podcasts, and you can also subscribe so that you can get us regularly each week on Wednesday mornings. Thanks so much for listening. Go out and bloom.